This is Dr. Stephen Jones, and this is the second part of management thought. We're taking a look at the history of management thought, and in this second part we're going to take a look at the behavioral viewpoint, very strongly influenced by psychology. We will look briefly at systems and contingency, but that will be within the context of general history. The behavioral viewpoint was trying to find a way to make the workplace more both human and humane. Places where people would go and would find it agreeable to work. The systems standpoint is a look at putting systems together in the workplace, making sure that things mesh together. As a part of the American landscape and now throughout the rest of the world, it was a way to get people within an organization, say marketing and accounting and the work floor and suppliers, buyers. It was a way to integrate everything that they did so that people were working towards a common goal. The contingency viewpoint is becoming responsive to the situation, as the point here says. Basically, it says you need to respond to the environment. Both systems and contingency viewpoint are what we speak about more these days when we're looking at the managerial workplace. We find ways to get people to talk together, to work together, and in this way make the workplace more productive. Excuse me. The contingency viewpoint, the environmental area, we will see when we take a look at such things as a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, looking at internal and external environmental cues that help us to make better decisions. And so these two we will weave throughout the rest of the semester. Early behavioral theorists. Now, you remember from the last time that we were talking that Lillian Gilbreth was one of the people that we had discussed. And she and her husband Frank in the 1800s, 1900s had studied time and motion studies, but that after his death, she had moved on into the psychology side of the workplace. She is a contemporary of Mary Parker Follett, Hugo Munsterberg, and Elton Mayo. And they are all looking at how the workplace as a society, the workplace fits into the American landscape and how people are affected by the work they do and the environment that they're in. Now, Mary Parker Follett was one that, well, this set of behavioral theorists, not necessarily conforming to socialism, was taking on a fair number of projects and thoughts that kind of led, in that same fashion. They weren't so much looking at labor movements, but they did understand why labor movements were affected by the things that they did. Mary Parker Follett used her psychology training to try to get managers to quit micromanaging and let the worker do more in the workplace. Now, the worker up to this point, remember, had not been allowed to have a voice about the work that they did. They rather were simply told, these are the tasks that you need to do. It was, can we make them more efficient by their training, by the resources that we give to them to be able to do the job, by the managers who manage in such a way that they squeeze out the most work possible out of each person, and yet do so in an orderly fashion, a humane fashion, and something that brings profit both to the workers and to the organization. Mary Parker Follett, along with some others, begins to say that the employee is not worth less than the manager. Now, notice I didn't say worthless, but worth less, because the prevailing thought at that point had been that employees were employees. They're like cogs in a machine. You take one out, put another one in. Her thought was that the employee has something to bring, the labor has something to bring to the mix, and management needs to listen to that and stay out of the way. Okay, makes a lot of sense. Hugo Munsterberg is using some similar philosophies here instead of what we got from Frederick Taylor, who looks at physical qualities of the person as making them fit the job. Hugo Munsterberg is using psychology to do that same thing. What type of personality is fitted to being a teacher? What type of personality is fitted to being a factory worker? And so he's trying to use that. Now, okay, you probably laughed at his picture, and he has got a funky kind of look to him, but that was fashionable among some academics of his time. I definitely do not look like Hugo Munsterberg, but he was taking psychology in a different fashion. Now, Mary Parker Follett, practical, utopian, but also a huge, and in her case she was relatively socialist, huge labor advocate. Hugo Munsterberg, not so much a labor activist, but he was trying to help managers find the right kind of personality complex. Who could be a salesperson versus Mary Parker Follett's use of this with trying to make the workplace more labor friendly. Elton Mayo comes in the 30s and does an interesting thing. It has nothing to do with the selection of people. It has nothing to do with the labor movement. He's a pure theorist brought in to solve a problem. Western Electric Plant is having a lot of problems. They cannot get a handle on how to make the workplace better for their people. They were relatively forward-thinking. They wanted a comfortable place for their people to be. They wanted to be fair to their employees, and so they brought different kinds of improvements in. They'd had time and motion studies done. Nothing was improving productivity. They basically were stymied. And they brought Elton Mayo and his crew in. And Elton Mayo is a good academic, and he studies this situation out for a little bit. He decides, I wonder what the effect of lighting would be. He's not looking at anything else. He's just looking at all the different things that they'd done. He starts looking at lighting. Now, the Western Electric Plant was making telephone relays. We saw in an earlier photograph last time, a telephone factory. Well, they had electric relays that would send a call from one place through another, and those needed to be tripped. So they were making those relays at the plant that you see on the right-hand side of the screen. So he thought maybe changing the lighting would be better, that if you increase the lighting, people could see better, and therefore they could do a better job. And lo and behold, they increased their lighting, 25% or so. They increased their lighting, and productivity got better. Awesome! Well, he decided to see if providing even more light would help out. So they increased the lighting even more. And productivity, awesome! Got even better. After each increase that they were doing, they'd go around to people and they'd say, now, can you see better? Does this make you feel better? Do you like what's going on here? And every time, people were like, yes, this is really good. We like, being able to see better. It's we can do more work, etc., etc. And so they increased it to like sunlight out there. And people were just working. Sometimes they had to shade their eyes a little bit, but they were working really hard. And so they thought, wow, well, maybe it's a little bit too much. So after increasing it all the way to sunlight, getting productivity up all the time, they reduced it back down to some earlier level. And they noticed that by going from that really bright to even lower levels, productivity was still going up. They had increased the lighting and productivity went up. They began decreasing the lighting, productivity still going up. They decreased the lighting to lower than it was when they first went into the factory. Productivity is still going up. Well, the Western Electric factory cannot figure out what's going on. Elton Mayo can't figure out what's going on. And they go back and take all their data and they start to study it. And they realize that what has happened is it wasn't the lighting that was important. It was the fact that they talked to the employees and asked them how they felt and asked them if this was beneficial to them. The fact that people were being listened to was what was increasing productivity. And Elton Mayo called this the Hawthorne effect because it was the Hawthorne Western Electric plant that they were at. And he wrote about this later, the Hawthorne effect, that by studying something, you can improve worker productivity simply by listening to them. So you study it, you listen to people, you ask them questions, and they start then having a better attitude about things. And we take this over into management then, that by involving people, you tend to get better work out of them. Elton Mayo simply was looking at it from an academic standpoint, and the studying was the important part. But we implement this today along with the ideas that Mary Parker Follett had about managing less and letting people do more. And even what Hugo Munsterberg did by a discussion of finding people who seem to fit a job. I'm not saying that multiple different kinds of personalities can't also be effective in jobs, but there is some idea that certain types of people seem to do certain kinds of jobs a little bit better than others, and there's some usefulness to that. So these early behavioral theorists use psychology and human behavior concepts to try to change the American workplace and make them a better place out there. And these theorists then take us from the concept that the factory is just a machine place and that the employees are just machines out there, to the concept that they are actually people, thinking people with other reasons to be at the workplace besides just having pay. You get into the human relations theorists, and that's where we get into even more psychology. Douglas McGregor with Theory X and Theory Y kinds of managers. That the kind of manager that you have will also affect you. It's not just concepts about how employees work, but how labor works out there, but how management works with them makes a difference. And then you probably have studied about Abraham Maslow in psychology, that people have different kinds of needs, and these needs feed the things that we go after. Physiological needs and safety needs are the most basic of needs that we have, and you need money to be able to have a place to live and food to eat, heat and cold at the proper times, and to feel like there's a locked door between you and the outside when you go to bed at night. These things are important drivers for why we go to work. And if you have those needs satisfied, then you have the ability, if you choose to, the ability to move on up. Social types of needs, the love and belonging, that there are people around that care about you. Self-esteem needs, where we look at feeling better about ourselves internally. And then self-actualization needs, where we look at making more out of ourselves through education, etc. So his hierarchy of needs here is simply an idea that the needs at the very top are built upon the fact that we have satisfied needs below, that it's difficult, if not impossible, to get an employee, if we apply it to the modern workplace, get an employee to do self-actualizing types of behaviors if they're not making enough money and if they're worried about the safety in the workplace. So providing a safe workplace with enough money and enough, the proper times for work, etc., for that person is a foundation, not the house itself. The rest of the house is built on top of that foundation. So their movement has sparked many self-help books. It's sparked management help books, which help you to tap into the fact that your people are thinking human beings, and again, not just cogs in a machine. As we see the development over the 20th century, we've gone from the early factory workplaces we saw at the end of the last lecture to the Depression era, where we started getting large masses of humanity working together on large projects, and then as a result changing the American workplace by the need to understand how to get very complex goals achieved, such as putting up a dam or building large buildings or creating the interstate network that we have, the highway system that we have. All of these done in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, etc. These large infrastructure programs are largely driven by the government, not by private enterprise. And so government spending is driving this type of a workplace to go alongside with the factory workplace that the private sector has created out there. That creates new problems in the workplace, because now these infrastructure programs have to rely on not just a profit motive for the organization, because largely the people working for the government's not looking at the profit necessarily, but the companies that are contractors to them are looking at profit. So you now have a different hierarchy, a government working together with corporations who have people working with them. That adds another dimension of problems in there. And we start seeing this occur in our lifetimes, in the 20th century lifetimes. And finally, we get to the modern American workplace. And I know this does not look like a modern American workplace to you. This is definitely an old computer photograph. But in the 50s and the 60s, with the Cold War, the computing age coming along, we started seeing a change in the American workplace towards technology, and that has not let up. Now, the shape of the computers and the haircuts and the suits have definitely changed. But the fact that we use this type of technology has just increased. We've gone from using computers as just data storage to now instruments which allow us to make decisions, better decisions, communication from place to place. At the time this photograph was taken, computers being used for data storage were simply providing information to managers so that they could make better decisions. Today we let the computers help us make that analysis and help us to come up with decision possibilities. We use computers for communication now, instead of, as they did, use it just for data storage. We at that time had to use, the post office and telephones, just talking for conversation. But in today's workplace, the computer is a multitasking tool, and that has caused its own problems, because we were much more social in the 1900s. And you might question whether or not I'm saying we're less social now. But in an age of texting and tweeting, where you don't necessarily see and speak with somebody, you simply send them a message. You could argue that we've gone away from being as social beings as we were back in the 20th century to being less social in the workplace and much more likely to have brief, perfunctory conversations with those people that we work with today. And it has changed the dynamic, and we may have some things to discuss about that as the semester goes on. This is the end of part 2.